Imagine waking up tomorrow, right? You walk into this grand old church in Manchester, England, and you find hundreds of citizens just, well, weeping in the pews.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they aren't just crying, they're fervently praying for the resurrection of the British East India Company.
That is quite the image.
Right. They're begging the universe to bring back the Pax Britannica, the 19th century naval supremacy, all of it. It sounds completely absurd. You'd probably think they had completely lost their minds.
Well, yeah, you would, because, I mean, society generally understands that the 19th century world is just gone.
Exactly.
You can't just, pray the Industrial Revolution and unchallenged naval monopolies back into existence. It doesn't work that way.
Exactly. But here's the wild thing. All over the world today, in different forms, political leaders and these massive cultural movements are doing exactly that.
Yeah, they really are.
They're looking back at the ruins of their own ancient empires, feeling this magnetic, visceral sorrow, and trying to literally drag the past into the present.
Which is, frankly, the ultimate emotional trap. The past is incredibly seductive, especially when your present feels unstable.
Absolutely.
But treating history as this literal instruction manual for today is, well, it's an incredibly dangerous game.
Welcome to this deep dive. I'm your host, and today you and I are going on a journey through a sweeping meditation on empire, the relentless wheel of history, and that intense, deeply human longing for a lost golden age.
And I'm here to provide the historical context, the expert lens, if you will.
Glad to have you. Our mission today is to explore why once mighty civilizations fall into this trap of nostalgia. And more importantly, we're going to uncover the cold, hard mechanics of how real power is actually built.
And why trying to cosplay your ancestors usually ends in absolute disaster.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with that emotional gravity, the psychology of it all. When the currents of history start to flow against a society, their historical memory actually mutates. It stops being a passive, fond recollection of the good old days.
Right, it stops being just nostalgia.
Exactly. It crystallizes into this consuming existential yearning for resurrection.
What's fascinating here is the sheer conviction behind it. Societies experiencing decline often adopt a mindset where history is just a repeatable morality play.
A morality play.
Yeah, they start to believe that their ancestral achievements can be reclaimed simply by emulating their forebears. The logic goes, if we could just purify our communal life, enforce strict moral discipline, and summon enough collective willpower, we can literally reverse our geopolitical decline.
And we see this across the board, right? It's like this universal human impulse. Look at the Jewish tradition, for example.
The theological interpretation of defeat.
Right. Ancient defeats like the Babylonian exile in 586 BCE or the Roman destruction of the Second Temple, they were interpreted theologically. Catastrophe was viewed as a direct divine punishment for, covenantal failures.
Which meant the prophets framed exile as a call to repentance.
Exactly, embedding this deep cultural idea that moral renewal would summon a messianic return to glory.
And we see a very similar lament in the Muslim world today, actually.
Oh, definitely.
There is this stark, painful contrast drawn between the explosive dynamism of the early Islamic centuries, when armies and ideas surged outward to forge a vibrant civilization, and the later eras.
The eras of fragmentation and external colonization.
Right.
Yeah.
Because of that contrast, the conviction persists that returning to the ways of the righteous predecessors is the key.
Recapturing that pure unity of the Ummah, the global Muslim community.
Exactly. They see it as the guaranteed route back to superpower status.
And it spans across Asia, too. I mean, Hindu nationalism conjures this vision of Hafarat, or undivided India, rooted in ancient Vedic traditions.
Even though the historical reality is vastly more complicated.
Right. Like large swaths of that quote-unquote undivided region were actually under the direct imperial control of Achaemenid Persia in the ancient era. But the purified vision persists anyway.
Or look at China.
Oh, yeah, the century of humiliation.
Exactly. You see narratives framing the nation as perennially, eternally great, interrupted only by that externally imposed century of humiliation.
So when China builds military bases today, it's framed internally as a restoration of the natural order, not a new rise.
From the Indus River to the Mediterranean shores, the descendants of once mighty empires hear the exact same seductive whisper.
That through remembrance and resolve, lost power can be summoned anew. You know what it reminds me of? It's like a former star athlete obsessively reliving their high school glory days.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Right. They're 40 years old now, maybe their knees are shot, but they genuinely believe that if they just put on the old varsity jersey, run the exact same drills they ran at 17, and want it badly enough, they can somehow win the state championship again.
But the game has changed.
Exactly. The rules have changed. The jersey doesn't give you the power.
That is a brilliant way to look at it because it perfectly isolates the fundamental flaw in this thinking. Willpower and nostalgia cannot resurrect an empire.
Right. Treating history as a morality play where the most righteous automatically win is an emotional trap. It's born of wounded pride, not strategic reality.
Exactly.
So if wanting it really badly and putting on the old jersey isn't enough, what actually causes civilizations to rise in the first place? If we strip away the myth, what are the actual mechanics of ascent?
Well, empires emerge from incredibly specific, unrepeatable convergences. We're talking about a collision of geography, technological breakthroughs, demographics, and geopolitical vacuums.
Like the rise of the West after the year 1500, right?
Exactly. Historian Neil Ferguson famously outlined 6 institutional killer applications that propelled Europe, and particularly Britain, to global preeminence.
And they are entirely material, not mystical.
Right.
Let's actually dig into a few of these because the how is so important here. The first killer app is competition. And you have to look at the geography.
The fragmented landmass, right?
Yeah, Europe is this jagged, fragmented landmass full of mountains and peninsulas, which naturally created dozens of rival monarchies and city-states. It created a Darwinian pressure cooker.
If you failed to innovate militarily or economically, your neighbor conquered you. Period.
Right. Contrast that with the massive unified land empires of the time, like Ming China or the Ottomans.
Because they had successfully consolidated massive territories, they didn't face those same existential next-door rivalries every single day.
So they lacked that extreme do-or-die incentive for continuous paranoid reform.
Exactly. And that paranoid competition fed right into another killer app science. But not just philosophers looking at the stars.
We're talking about the practical mastery of nature.
Right. Captain James Cook didn't just sail around hoping to bump into land. He used the 1769 transit of Venus across the sun to calculate longitude and gain unprecedented navigational precision.
Which directly aided the colonization of the Pacific. And you can't fund those expeditions without the third application, the rule of law and secure property rights.
This is huge because it explains how the money moved. Enforceable contracts enabled the invention of the joint stock company.
Right. Before the joint stock company, if you funded a merchant ship and it sank in a storm, you were personally ruined. You lost everything.
But with entities like the English East India Company, thousands of investors could pool their resources.
You own 1% of 100 different ships. It diffused the risk, which allowed them to project massive corporate power across oceans.
Add to that medicine, specifically the discovery that quinine neutralized malaria. That finally allowed European forces to survive and expand into tropical interiors like Africa.
And then there's the consumer society. I love this one.
It's fascinating, right?
Yeah, it wasn't just factories magically appearing. You had a growing middle class developing an insatiable craving for tea, cotton, sugar, and porcelain.
To meet that massive consumer demand, you had to invent faster ways to produce and transport goods.
The craving for a cup of sweetened tea literally fueled the Industrial Revolution.
When you put all this together, competition, science, property rights, medicine, consumerism, and a disciplined work ethic, you get a highly specific power package.
And the physical legacy of this is still visible today.
Oh, definitely. In places like the village of Draban in Dera Ismail Khan, Pakistan, you can still see colonial mansions, military forts, and old telephone lines.
They are physical proof that British dominance was built on material engineering and institutional tech, not divine favor. But pause for a second, because I want you, the listener, to think about this too.
Like that.
Doesn't this framework feel a little too tidy? It can come across as heavily Eurocentric. It feels like it neatly categorizes success while gliding right over the massive coercion, violence, exploitation, and enslavement that was the actual engine of a lot of this expansion.
It's a very fair pushback, actually, and Ferguson's framework has plenty of fierce critics for exactly that reason. But even if you critique the morality of it, it remains a vital materialist lens. The core truth holds. The British didn't conquer because heaven chose them or because they were simply morally superior.
They arrived bearing a historically contingent, time-bound package of technology and institutions.
Which brings us to the danger of ignoring that reality. If empires require the specific time-bound machinery, what happens when a modern leader tries to forcefully recreate an empire?
Using the aesthetics of the past, but without the actual tools of the present.
Exactly. That leads us to the absolute peril of tragic imitation. Cosplay, as you call it earlier.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think about Benito Mussolini in Italy in the 1930s. He explicitly, literally thought to resurrect the Roman Empire.
He styled himself as a new Caesar.
Yeah. He invaded Ethiopia in 1935, and his propaganda was entirely built around glorifying Roman legions, the eagles, the ancient roads. But it was pure theater.
Because he lacked the underlying causal matrix, Rome's original rise relied on unique contingencies.
Like the tactical flexibility of the Roman legion against clunky phalanx armies.
Right, and their unique citizenship integration policies, plus a massive geopolitical vacuum after they defeated Carthage. Mussolini had none of that.
What he needed was modern industrial might and a 20th century military-industrial complex.
Which Italy lacked compared to its neighbors. His theatrical revival ended in farcical tragedy and his execution in Milan.
And we see the exact same tragic theatricality with the Shah of Iran in 1971. He threw this unimaginably lavish 2,500-year celebration of the Persian Empire at the ancient ruins of Persepolis.
Oh, the tent city.
Yes. He literally stood at the tomb of Cyrus the Great and gave a speech invoking his spirit. He flew in French cuisine served on Limoges porcelain in a massive air-conditioned tent city in the desert for global dignitaries.
All while actively ignoring the structural reality of his own country. That opulence masked deep domestic poverty and his heavy reliance on his brutal secret police, the Savak, to maintain order.
He was trying to appropriate antiquity without addressing the modern social and economic transformations happening right outside his tent.
And the result? Just 8 years later, the 1979 Islamic Revolution toppled him completely.
It proves that cosplaying the past isn't just silly, it's actively dangerous. It completely blinds leaders to the actual technological and economic shifts of their own time.
Right.
And if dragging the past into the present always fails, it makes you wonder, is history just a one-way street? Are we trapped on a conveyor belt, or does history actually move in cycles?
That question has obsessed philosophers for centuries, especially when they look back at the ultimate, unrepeatable moment, the Greek miracle.
The classical Greek era. It produced an intellectual explosion that basically still runs global thought today.
You had the pre-Socratics in Ionia, guys like Thales, trying to find natural rather than mythological explanations for the universe.
Or Heraclitus, who famously said you cannot step into the same river twice because the water is always flowing and changing.
And then, of course, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle.
There's this iconic anecdote about Alexander the Great and Diogenes the Cynic.
Oh, I love this story.
Right. Diogenes was a philosopher who rejected all societal norms and literally lived in a giant ceramic tub in the marketplace.
Just a tub in the middle of town.
Exactly. So Alexander, who has conquered most of the known world at this point, comes up to Diogenes, stands over him, and says, "Ask of me any favor you desire, and I will grant it."
And Diogenes, sitting in his tub, just looks up at the most powerful man on earth and says, "Stand out of my sunlight."
It's the perfect encapsulation of the era's extremes. The ultimate worldly conquest meeting radical, untouchable self-sufficiency.
But the key here is that this intellectual crucible required the specific, decentralized structure of the Greek polis, or city-state.
It required geographic fragmentation that encouraged weird experimentation, and it required the exact timing of the post-Persian War economic boom.
You can't just mandate that modern Athenians replicate that environment today. The fire has burned out.
Which brings us to the philosophers who tried to map these civilizational lifespans. The guys who looked at Greece and Rome and tried to find the hidden clockwork of history.
Oswald Spengler is one of the most provocative here. He argued that cultures are essentially organic superorganisms.
With biological life cycles, right?
Exactly. A youthful spring, a summer maturity, an autumnal harvest, and a wintry decline.
And he believed each culture had a unique soul, right?
Yes, he contrasted what he called the Western Faustian soul, which is characterized by a restless, tragic striving toward the infinite, always pushing boundaries.
Against the classical Apollonian soul of the Greeks and Romans.
Right, which was deeply focused on proportion, harmony, and defined boundaries. To Spengler, these cultures bloom, exhaust their specific destined possibilities, and then they just wither.
Okay, wait, I have to push back on Spengler here.
Go for it.
If history is just a plant that blooms and dies based purely on some biological destiny, doesn't that strip away human agency entirely? I mean, to you listening, it feels incredibly fatalistic. Why even try to innovate if it's just wintertime for your civilization?
It feels fatalistic, sure, and that's the most common critique of his biological determinism. But look at the lifespan of the Romans, or the Ottomans, or the Ming Dynasty.
You're saying the exhaustion is real.
Spengler would argue you can't deny the historical reality of civilizational exhaustion. Institutions get tired. However, that's exactly why his theories are usually balanced with thinkers like Arnold Toynbee and Ibn Khaldun, who inject human agency back into the equation.
How does Toynbee see it?
Toynbee proposed a challenge and response theory. He argued that civilizations don't just grow because of destiny. They grow when a creative minority successfully responds to massive environmental or social challenges.
So if the leaders get lazy and stop responding creatively, the civilization falls.
Exactly.
And Ibn Khaldun, he's a fascinating figure.
Ibn Khaldun was a 14th century Arab sociologist, and he introduced this brilliant concept of asabiya, which translates roughly to group solidarity or social cohesion.
Think of it like a scrappy tech startup in a garage.
Exactly, a perfect modern parallel. Khaldun observed the cycle where tough, nomadic tribes with intense asabiya, intense hunger and cohesion, would conquer established urban civilizations that had grown soft and lazy on luxury.
The garage startup disrupts the massive, lazy corporate giant.
Yes. But then, once the nomads take over the city, or the startup moves into a luxury Silicon Valley campus with free massages and kombucha on tap, they lose their edge.
Within a few generations, they become the soft urbanites, and they invite a new wave of hungry conquerors to disrupt them.
So while they debate how much agency we have, the shared truth across Spengler, Toynbee, and Khaldun is that civilizational energy is strictly temporal.
You cannot force the wheel of history backward. Once you are the corporate giant, you can't magically pretend to be the hungry nomad again.
And since the wheel only moves forward, you have to adapt to the tools of the present. Early Islamic expansions in the 7th and 8th centuries were undeniably swift.
Driven by extreme mobility on camels, intense faith, and perfect timing against the exhausted Byzantine and Sassanid empires.
But modern power is not about cavalry or swords.
No, modern power is Silicon Valley. It's Shanghai. It's algorithms, venture capital, and highly educated workforces. The modern world relies on the post-Westphalian nation-state.
Meaning, power is based on defined, internationally recognized borders, international law, and global supply chains.
It's not based on sprawling, supranational caliphates or borderless empires.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we can see how deep historical trauma can actually warp a society's memory of its own golden age, preventing them from adapting to this modern, post-Westphalian reality.
A profound example of this is the Muslim world's response to colonization, specifically through the lens of the poet and philosopher Muhammad Iqbal.
Iqbal is such a tragic, fascinating figure. He was born in Sialkot, in modern-day Pakistan, under the height of British colonial rule.
He watched the final dismantling of the Mughal Empire and felt the deep marginalization of this culture. His philosophy was essentially an unconscious memoir driven by the humiliation of being colonized.
And because of that humiliation, his poetry countered it with vivid, aggressive evocations of Bedouin restlessness and mountain fortitude.
He fiercely championed a concept called kuti, which is an assertive, almost militant selfhood.
He exalted the martial energy of those original 7th century conquerors as the answer to British domination.
But here is the massive, heartbreaking irony. By fixating so heavily on the warriors of the past, this revivalist focus entirely overshadowed the true Muslim Golden Age.
Precisely. The warriors get romanticized, while the intellectual giants, the people who actually built the civilization's enduring legacy, are completely overlooked.
Think about thinkers like Avicenna.
Oh, absolutely. He authored the Canon of Medicine, which was the standard medical textbook in Europe well into the 17th century.
Avicenna is mind-blowing. He devised the floating man thought experiment. I want you to picture this for a second. Imagine you are suspended in midair, completely blindfolded.
Like a sensory deprivation tank.
Exactly. You can't see, hear, smell, or touch anything, not even your own limbs. Avicenna asked, in that state of total sensory zero, would you still know that you exist?
And he concluded, yes, your self-awareness remains.
He explored the fundamental nature of consciousness and anticipated René Descartes' I think, therefore I am by hundreds of years.
Or look at Al-Khwarizmi. He literally invented algebra.
The word itself comes from the Arabic title of his book, Al-Jab.
He gave us the foundational mathematics for the algorithms that run our entire modern digital world today.
You have Al-Hosn, whose foundational work on optics and his explanation of the camera obscura revolutionized physics and the understanding of light. Isaac Newton cited him later.
And Ibn Tufayl, whose philosophical novels heavily influenced European empiricism and the scientific method.
Overemphasizing martial purity and jihadist revival has frequently yielded nothing but bloodshed and geopolitical isolation.
It sidelines the inclusive, patient, empirical inquiry that actually made cities like Baghdad and Cordoba global beacons of knowledge.
The sword may have enabled the initial borders, but it was intellectual openness, scientific curiosity, and brilliant administration that gave the civilization its actual weight and endurance.
Exactly.
So, what does this all mean? The ultimate lesson here, whether you are looking at the trajectory of a massive nation-state, the strategy of a modern corporation, or honestly the arc of your own personal life, is that the past is a repository of lessons.
It is not a literal template.
Exactly. True resurrection, true success does not come from cosplaying the aesthetics of your ancestors. It comes from adopting the spirit of their innovations.
It's about applying empirical reason, creativity, and radical openness to the tools and challenges of today.
This raises one final, really important question.
Yeah, as we move deeper into a borderless digital era, an era increasingly governed by artificial intelligence, hyperconnectivity, and decentralized networks, will the very concept of a geographic, culturally bounded empire or golden age become entirely obsolete?
That's a huge question.
If the future of human achievement and power exists in the cloud rather than on a physical map, then looking backward for a blueprint isn't just futile. It's looking in the wrong dimension entirely.
It's a completely different dimension. You know, walking through those ancient ruined arches we talked about at the beginning, it is so easy to listen to the ghosts. It's easy to wish you could rebuild the stones exactly as they were.
But history tells us the stones are not what mattered.
What mattered was the mind that figured out how to build the arch in the first place. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Face forward, keep a critical mind, and we'll see you next time.